Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on accessibility and inclusion in green and blue spaces. My name is Nebo Kane, and I'm one of the members of the Groundswell team based at Queen's University Belfast, and I'm going to be chairing the session this afternoon. We have three wonderful speakers with us today. We have Jacqueline O'Hagan from EastSide Greenways, Kyleigh Lough from Mae Murray Foundation, and councillor Ruth Brooks from the Belfast City Council. And I don't want to take too much time away from our speakers, but I thought it would be good just to provide a little bit of context about the Groundswell project before we kick off. So Groundswell is a research consortium with three main hub cities, Belfast, Edinburgh and Liverpool. I'm of course from Queen's, we're the Belfast lead for the project. Groundswell is interested in urban green and blue spaces. So our green spaces being the likes of parks, gardens, forests, and our blue spaces being the likes of our beaches, our rivers, our lakes, etc. We want to better understand the health and well-being benefits of these spaces and implement actions to maximise the health and well-being benefits of these green and blue spaces. So we work with other researchers across the UK and beyond. We work with community groups, with policymakers, with practitioners, to try and better understand the different systems at play and to create a cycle of research, policy, implementation, and of course then active citizens. So health inequalities is of particular interest to us in Groundswell. In fact, it's actually at the core of the project. We want to ensure that social, economic, environmental and access inequalities are addressed in urban green and blue space interventions, and that any improvements to green and blue spaces are inclusive and encourage diverse communities to use them. Which brings us to today's topic, of course, which is accessibility and inclusion in green and blue spaces. So we're going to be talking a little bit about parks and beaches today, and we know that these settings are ones that we can connect with nature in, where we can interact with our friends and family and peers and improve our physical and mental health. But we also know that not all of these spaces are actually accessible to all. And some groups, such as those living with disabilities or older age groups, are often excluded from accessing those benefits of these spaces. So today we're going to hear about two reports specifically that we worked on with, respectively with EastSide Greenways and with Mae Murray Foundation, which address this issue. So in case I continue to go on any further, I'd like to just invite our first speaker to share their screen. And while they're doing that, I just want to remind or highlight that we have the Q&A box open for any questions that you would like to submit. Please, you can submit questions in this at any time. Your speakers might address this as they're going along, or we can defer some questions to the end of the session where we have some time for Q&A. So our first speaker is Jacqueline O'Hagan, who is the manager for EastSide Greenways, one of our partners on Groundswell, and Jacqueline will be talking to us today about a piece of research on accessibility and inclusion on the Connswater Community Greenway. Thanks, Jackie.
Thank you. Main challenge across there with the technology seeming to work, but if anyone has any issues seeing this at any point, please do let me know, or if the slides don't move across, let me know as well. As Neve mentioned, my name's Jacqueline and I manage the EastSide Greenways project here at EastSide Partnership in East Belfast. And we specifically focus a lot of our work on the Connswater Community Greenway. When this moves across, okay. Sorry, that seems to have been, I'm still stuck on my first slide, Neve. Can you see if it's moved?
The title slide for now, Jacqueline.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Stumbling at the first block. My screen doesn't seem to be moving across, but oh, here we go. Now it's caught up. Hopefully you can all see that now. So I wanted to start with a bit of context as to why access and inclusion is a topic that we're really interested in. So firstly, the Connswater Community Greenway is a 16-kilometre greenway through a very urban area, and it was designed with health benefits really at the core of what it was trying to achieve, but also connecting people to facilities and services and to each other and to nature. So it was designed with access and inclusion in mind, and a really practical, tangible way that was done through the infrastructure. The Greenway is a flat and relatively even surface, and there are very few slopes or hills, so it's pretty easy to move along. There are drop curbs at all of the crossings. There are regular signposts along the route. There are access points from different services and facilities, but also from residential areas. and it is on a main transport route, so you can access it by public transport as well. So there are a lot of things that were factored into the design, and we can really see how that has come about when people use the space. We see a real multiple user experience on this. We have people walking their dog, we have people running, cycling, but we also see a high volume of people on mobility scooters and wheelchairs on the Greenway. And we don't have any statistics currently that kind of back that up, but we are based right next to the Greenway and we're out on it all the time. And it is certainly something we see used by various different members of the community. And that's something that we're really proud of. But what I would like to say is, although the Greenway was completed and we're seeing it used in a really positive way, we always will continue to engage with our Greenway users. And it's not just about the physical infrastructure of the space, but it's how it's being used and is there any other ways that we can help and support people to do that. Over the years, we have kind of approached this through an engagement program and an animation program. We sit on various different stakeholder forums, specifically one in East around dementia-friendly East Belfast. So that works with our older residents and people living with dementia, and how are we encouraging or supporting those people to be able to access the Greenway. We have also got practical programs that we run. We have a gentle walk program every Monday that is for older people, people with mobility issues who would just like a led, guided, short leisurely walk in the Greenway that's supported, and we have lots of different people coming along to that with various different challenges, and they really enjoy that Monday morning, and of course the tea that follows after, because it's a lot about that social engagement as well. We've run other programs like litter picking groups. We support local organisations to get out and litter pick on the Greenway, but we're also really pleased to see other organisations putting on programs such as RNIB, who have a weekly walk, Engage with Age, who have a weekly walk. So we support other organisations to use the space as well. Of course, the physical space is complete and has been since 2017, but we're always looking at how we can continue to improve that. And I think that's really key in the context of access and inclusion. It's important to note that the Greenway completed in 2017, the designs go back even further than that. So although access and inclusion was factored into that, our population is ever changing, and we have to continue to look at how we can support people currently using the space and looking to use it in the future. So that's what brought us to this piece of work, and really grateful to Groundswell and Queen's for helping to support this. It's something we wanted to do for a long time, but wouldn't have been able to do without their support. And firstly, before I move on to how that process was carried out, it's really key to show some of the partners that we brought around the table. For us, it's really important that those people affected by or living with disabilities or access issues are included in the conversation. So it was really key that lots of different experts and residents were brought around the table to get involved. So the consultation process itself for this report started in, I think, February of this year. We brought on board the expertise of a local consultation firm, Studio Adair. So we just felt it was really important that we had people on board who could actually drive this forward, and they had expertise in the infrastructure that might be required in terms of recommendations. The process was carried out between February and March. We had an online survey that received 99 results. That seems like a low number, but it's really important to note that that survey was aimed and very targeted at people who are living with disabilities. So this wasn't something we kind of put out widely to get as many people engaged as possible. It was really by focusing that feedback on those people who could benefit from being involved in this conversation. We had 37 individuals from partner organisations involved, and we had 16 groups across East and beyond involved. And that was groups who are working with clients and other organisations that are directly addressing access issues. We had online focus groups, and we even hosted telephone conversations for people who really struggle to engage with either a survey online or come down in person and get involved. So we were able to chat to people on the phone. We engaged 23 people in in-person engagement sessions before our main event. So that was litter picking on the Greenway and workshops on the Greenway. And then we followed that up with our final event, which was a 2-day wheel and walk shop along the entire route of the Connswater Community Greenway. And we had 41 individuals come along and get involved in that. And it was really lovely to be able to walk with all of our users from Victoria Park through CSO Square up to Orangefield and Craigaglen, and really just hear from them as we went along about not just the challenges, but the opportunities and the benefits of the Greenway as well. The findings for this we found really interesting. We I kind of had a bit of an idea of what we would hear back from people. I certainly knew that we would find out that people wanted more toilets and more shelter and some of those physical pieces of work, but we weren't expecting some of the extent of the conversations that came through. And I actually found this really eye-opening and really interesting conversation starter for me. People firstly really noted that interacting with nature was a really positive benefit for them. But then on the flip of that planting not maintained along the Greenway, for example, was a real challenge. So overgrown shrubbery, branches on the path, anything that really obstructed their movement was a real challenge. And that's not something we've ever thought of before. As an organisation, we really encourage proper maintenance of the Greenway, but this is another slant for us to look at as to why that needs to happen and why that's important. Flooding was flagged, and the Greenway in itself is actually also an extensive flood alleviation scheme, which we're really proud of. So in heavy rainfall, the park itself floods rather than people's homes. But I suppose something we've never really thought of is how that affects people with a disability who are coming through that space. So, or as I mentioned before, the Greenway is really accessible and really easy to move through. If that floods and somebody has to come up with an alternative route, it often takes them off the Greenway and onto a busy road or footpath, which is more challenging. And that's just simply not something we had considered before. So it's how can we really work with some of those people to address that? And then something came through really clearly about communications around the Greenway. For a bit of context, there are 2 Greenways in East Belfast, the Connswater Community Greenway being one, but also the Comber Greenway. And both are run very differently and maintained differently and have different access issues. So I suppose people can get really confused when we're sharing information about the Connswater Community Greenway. They're not entirely sure sometimes which Greenway we're talking about, or if they're asking for changes or improvements, we only have maybe got the influence over the Connswater Community Greenway and can't do as much to support people who are using the Comber Greenway. That's something we would like to possibly address going forward. Infrastructure, and this comes back to what I had initially thought would be a really big talking point, so I'm not surprised that it came through. Toilets really was always anticipated to be one of our biggest findings on this, and it definitely was highlighted strongly. Not just having more toilets, but having better toilets, not just accessible toilets, but changing places toilets, which I'm sure Kyleigh will reference in her talk a bit later as well. There isn't very many toilets along the route, and this isn't going to be a quick win for us in terms of getting resources and funding to actually build those, but are there public buildings along the Greenway that could be better opened or better utilised for people who are needing to use toilets? Signposting came through very clearly. We have a lot of signs along the Greenway and a lot of wayfinding markers. These are done with this image on the screen here that you're seeing, but also through panels. And we even have some creative design through the footpaths and the curbs. But what really came back, and we did work with RNIB and had several participants with site impairments, and they flagged that some of those signposts are simply too high, the writing's too small, it blends in too much with the background, but also the signs on the ground would be really difficult for them to see as well. So they actually really struggled with the signposts along the route, which was something we weren't really anticipating, and that's been really big learning for us. Benches and shelter actually were one of the things we anticipated would be a really big comment. But what we found through this consultation was that people were quite happy with the number of benches along the Greenway, which was great to hear. They felt that there was enough and adequate benches. And while they did acknowledge that there wasn't enough shelter and they would maybe like to see more, they didn't see it as a huge barrier because many of the people engaging were coming to the Greenway knowing that they were coming to an outdoor event or an outdoor activity. So while it wasn't a huge problem for them, it is something we flagged as it would be lovely to have a bit more of in the future anyway. We have got play parks along the Greenway, and what we found during this consultation actually was that a couple of the play parks were closed when we were out doing our workshop. They were closed for maintenance, but this hadn't been communicated to us and certainly to the wider public. So things like that can be really difficult barriers for people. Certainly if you've got, if you're living with a disability or you have issues with access, you're very likely going to be looking up the space that you're going to in advance and trying to find as much information as you can. So if that's not shared and you're not aware that's going to happen, that can be a real challenge when you get there and realise it. But also we noted that while there is some accessible equipment in the play parks, there could certainly be a lot more, and that's something we'd like to see happen more of as well. And then physical barriers. This was things like bollards. There are lots of permanent bollards along the route, and there's obviously a reason for that, but we would certainly be big advocates for removing or replacing those with temporary bollards that can be removed for people to move through. But as well as that, there were a lot of conversations about desire lines, which are informal routes that have been created by people who use the path slightly differently from what it was intended to, and they have formed naturally. Now, while they are informal routes, that by their very nature, it means that they're often gravelly or muddy or really uneven surfaces. And they might be the easiest route for people, but they're not the easiest route for somebody possibly with an access issue. And then we moved on to user experience. This is something we can have a bit more effect on. So it was things like assistance. What we found, which was really interesting, was that less than a third of the people participating in this workshop, felt more confident about using this space unassisted in relation to those who didn't have a disability. So there was a real lack of confidence from this user group in terms of using the Greenway without assistance. And we did supply that as a part of our workshop. We're very kindly donated equipment from Mae Murray Foundation and Disability Sports NI to allow people to be able to take part in this. But how do we actually work together to make that more accessible going forward? People noted that they really enjoyed the heritage information. It gave them something to read. They noted the programs and events are a great way of making things more accessible, and that often disabilities and access issues are not factored into the planning of events. So how could that be done better? I'd mentioned desire lines earlier. Litter was a big thing as well. It's something we always try and advocate for more litter picking and people looking after spaces. But what we have to think about is if you're in a wheelchair or have a cane, for example, dog poo can be really challenging and it can get stuck on your wheels. So how do we really make our paths neater? Noise pollution is a real challenge, not along the whole route, but certainly at some of those big intersections. And if you're already having issues, sensory issues, then that can be a real problem. The final thing in our findings was about shared use and cultural barriers. So the Greenway is a shared use space. We have cyclists, we have people on mobility scooters, walkers, runners, dog walkers, and how all of those people interact with each other can sometimes cause conflict. And it's all around an education piece. How can we educate people to be more respectful of everybody using the space and just more mindful and aware of who's there? And then the cultural barriers, that actually flags back to that element of litter on the Greenway. You know, we certainly are an organisation who would love to see bonfires, for example, moved into something more environmentally friendly. But in the meantime, when those large bits of debris are coming into our parks, could we at least try and lobby for them being off the path, because they can be a real challenge for people to navigate around. You'll be glad to hear this is my final slide, hopefully not going for time. But out of those findings, we had a lot of key recommendations. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but I just wanted to highlight the three themes that they were kind of put into. It was enabling collaborations. And I think this particular piece of work is actually just the start of the conversation, and some of those partnerships that we've developed throughout and some of the collaborative work in that wheel and walk shop, I think we would like to see happening going forward. Addressing some of those user conflicts, how do we make people aware of other users in their Greenway, and how do we make them a bit more respectful and a bit more kind to others as they're passing? And how do we facilitate placemaking opportunities? So this is probably the most challenging one. This is the lobbying piece. How do we all work together to try and lobby for better resources to allow for improvements to our parks and open spaces to make them just that little bit more welcoming for everybody? And that is the end of presentation.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. That was a really great overview of that report and the piece of work that we did, and some really interesting findings and powerful insights. And it's, as you say, really just the beginning of the conversation, isn't it? And I'll be interested too to see a lot of the things that you touched on will be things that Mae Murray Foundation are also facing in the blue space side of things. So thank you very much. Kyleigh, if you'd like to begin sharing your screen, and just while Kyleigh is doing that, this is a reminder to pop your questions in the Q&A box. And indeed, if you have any general comments, you can also use the chat function for that. Whilst Jacqueline was presenting, I also put the link to the report into the chat box, so you can access it there. I'll also pop the Inclusive Beaches report in there while Kyleigh is presenting as well. So yes, I'd like to introduce Kyleigh Lough, who is the Chief Executive of Mae Murray Foundation, another one of our partners on Groundswell. And Kyleigh will be talking through Mae Murray Foundation's Inclusive Beach Programme and the impact evaluation of it. Thank you, Kyleigh.
Great, thank you so much for having me here today. And what a day to be talking about green and blue spaces when all over the news we're hearing about the NHS and how it's collapsing around us and all of the cuts that are coming and the importance that we need to start living healthier. Green and blue spaces are certainly one way to do that. But as we've heard, there are inequalities that exist. So today I'm going to talk to you a bit about our Inclusive Beach programme and the research that has been done by the Groundswell team. So to start with, I'm going to tell you a bit about Mae Murray Foundation for those who aren't aware of who we are and why we exist. So the young smiley face that you can see in all of these photos is Talia. Talia was born 25 years ago with quadriplegic cerebral palsy. She is a power chair user, she's non-verbal, and growing up, she really lacked opportunities to be able to take part. You know, when I was young, I went to GB, I went swimming every day. There was always a different after school activity. Talia didn't have those same opportunities growing up. She had personal care requirements and activities just weren't suited to her needs. So she very much sat on the outside of the community. And then the local environments, such as the park and the beach, they just weren't inclusive to her needs either. There was nothing she could actually take part in there. So she was very much excluded, sitting on the outside. That exclusion led to poor mental health. And the thing is, she wasn't the only one. Mae Murray then, who you can see in the top right-hand photo, Mae was her granny. And Mae always found innovative solutions for Talia to be able to take part. So whether it was adapting a piece of equipment, whether it was creating a new game, getting everyone down onto the floor, she always just opened everyone's imagination to the what if, what could life be for Talia, and just helped her to experience the same things as everyone else. So when Mae passed away in 2012, it left a massive gap in their lives. And Alex, who you can see in the bottom right-hand photo, who is the founder of Mae Murray Foundation, she had been informally collecting information from families for many years. And, you know, Talia's experience wasn't unique. She wasn't the only one excluded. She wasn't the only one experiencing poor mental health. So Mae Murray Foundation then was created in 2016. And it's very much a lived experience organisation. That means that the people who face the barriers, the people who are excluded from the community, are the people who design the projects and design all of our very solution-focused practical projects. So I'm going to talk about one of those projects today, because otherwise I could go on all day. And I'm going to start by telling you a story about in 2016, we got a small pocket of money to bring 15 young people to the beach. At this point in time, we had one of the beach wheelchairs that you can see in the photo there. And we had just purchased Northern Ireland's first sit-down surfboard. Well, it was July, but it rained all day. And those 15 young people waited all day in the pouring rain for their 15-minute go in the sea. And one 17-year-old girl, came out of the sea and she said to me, "Kyleigh, did you know the sea is salty?" And well, we decided you shouldn't get to the age of 17 without having tasted the sea. But also we realised something had to be done about that. And like with all of our projects and with all of our lived experience activities, it's about bringing people back into the room, saying what worked, what didn't, but what if? What if cost wasn't a barrier? What if all of these different issues and barriers weren't in place? What would you like to have? And families were, you know, they told us, you know, we can't come here. There's no change in places toilets. There's no hoist. It was great that you had volunteers that went way above and beyond to get us here. But, you know, the toileting isn't okay. Parking was a nightmare. And really, we want to be able to come when the sun's out. We want to be able to come like everyone else spontaneously just to enjoy a day at the beach. And so we took that back with us and we went to a local authority and we started talking about the possibility of you know, what could be done. And that local authority had said that they were putting in a window so that people could look down onto the beach and see people taking part. So it was very clear that there was a misunderstanding of what inclusion actually is and the importance of participation, not just sitting on the sidelines watching on, but actually being able to take part in the value in that. So I'm going to quickly show you this video because it tells you much faster than I can what an inclusive beach is. But this is the lived experience solution that Mae Murray Foundation created as a result of that feedback.
The term inclusive beach was adopted by Mae Murray Foundation to describe a beach environment which has been carefully planned so that people of all ages and abilities can take part, fun and be included.
I never came to the beach, stood by the old.
No one should find themselves left out or facing barriers when a beach is truly inclusive.
But you brought me.
At an inclusive beach, visitors will be confident that they will have a stress-free arrival with appropriate parking or drop-off points. They will be able to move between the beach, eateries and public amenities. Amenities which offer dignified toileting for all. Visitors will be able to borrow beach mobility equipment and enjoy activities suited to a wide and varied range of need. Looking around an inclusive beach, you will see people of all ages and abilities taking part together, from beach cleaning to surfing, school trips to community festivals. Diversity will be visible.
An inclusive beach is important to me because I'm able to have like family days out with my family without worrying how am I going to get down on the beach. Just being able to have a walk along the beach with my wee cousins or my mum or my sister is just really, really good. You know, I feel like I'm a part of it rather than just sitting up watching them on the tarmac. I feel like I'm more independent. I'm able to go out and walk like on my own with with friends rather than having to bring my mum along.
The ownership or stewardship of beaches often lies with a local authority or other organisation, like the National Trust. Mae Murray Foundation has worked collaboratively with beach operators in Northern Ireland to create inclusive beaches which are more easily managed and sustained.
Because as I've said before, it's not the disabled person that is really disabled, it's the environment that disables them. So Mae Murray is helping the environment and to be more inclusive and have things like these beach chairs which you can hire on the Mae Murray website. And they just allow disabled people to have a great time just like anyone else would.
It is essential to keep any inclusive beach under constant review, seeking the views of all those who use it and those who don't, so that positive steps can be taken to remove any barriers to participation which emerge.
Next to you. I come up to the North Coast often. It's great to be able to hire these chairs for free of charge and to be able to enjoy the beach and the sea with my friends.
And Mae Murray Foundation have actually recently created a guide as to how to create, sustain and improve an inclusive beach. And we're delighted that this guide has actually recently been used in Australia, as far as Australia, and creating inclusion across the world, which is fantastic. So we're delighted to have had the opportunity to work with Groundswell team and record the impact that inclusive beaches have, not only on those who use them, but also those who bear witness to the diverse range of abilities that you see at a Mae Murray Foundation event. Our inclusive beaches are available all summer for families to take part themselves without the need for Mae Murray Foundation to be there. We run an activity programme at each of the 5 beaches, which is funded by the lottery, where members can take part in a wide range of activities such as swimming, volleyball, surfing, with beach cleaning, and loads more. But thanks to the Innovation Fund, we were able to create Northern Ireland's first inclusive paddleboarding programme. And we, using the funding available, we purchased a seated paddleboard, and members have enjoyed paddleboarding for the first time. It's a fantastic challenging activity that the whole family have enjoyed taking part in together. As part of our collaboration with Groundswell, the team committed to evaluating the impact of inclusive beaches. Some of our young people were upskilled to be able to take part in peer research. The method that they used was called photo voice, which with our participants, which combined the taking of photographs and interviews. The interviews were then transcribed and analysed by the research team. These, some other methods of research that were used were a member survey for Mae Murray Foundation members, and then also a survey for non-Mae Murray Foundation members who were attending the beach and had this experience of seeing diversity visible. So there were several themes that came out of all of this research, and I'm just going to briefly touch on 3 of them. So you can see some of the health benefits on this slide that people said that they experienced as a result of going to the beach. They told us that they get a better night's sleep after a day at the beach. They had more opportunities to exercise, to get fresh air, and enjoy time outdoors. Being able to experience the beach environment generally had a positive impact on the mental well-being, of people who went to the beach. Member families remarked on how beach events led to increased happiness, joy, fun. They said they felt valued and included. One member said, "Our son is seen as a valued person. Mae Murray Foundation see the person inside." Members said that they gained confidence, a sense of achievement at all the activities that were going on. Beach events gave families a positive perspective. One member said, "We have a more positive outlook as we can take part in activities that other people take for granted." And members also reported that the inclusive beaches had a positive impact on their social life. They had the opportunity to meet new people, to spend time with friends, to spend quality time together as a family, and to feel part of a community. Parents felt that they had opportunities to offer each other support, as they'd all been through many of the same barriers and circumstances as each other before. The research findings then were shared with artist Shan for More Than Minutes, who created this wonderful visual representation of the inclusive beach experience. So I'm sure you're glad I can't all see your faces. You'll all have your nose right up at the screen like I did when I first saw this. But as you can see from the outset, no one picture can ever show you, as well as this image, that diversity really is visible. And this is exactly what a day at the beach with Mae Murray Foundation looks like. You have all different people from all different backgrounds, all different abilities. Yes, there's sometimes the odd alpaca in the corner, but this is what a day looks like. Diversity really is visible, and this is what inclusion really is. So the findings concluded that Mae Murray Foundation created inclusive beaches really are addressing the inequalities at the beach environment, giving more people the opportunity to access blue spaces and improve physical and mental well-being, and that there is definitely a cause for supporting these inclusive beaches. So thank you to the Groundswell team for researching for this research and for highlighting the need to continue to support this important project. And thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Kyleigh. That was brilliant. Really great overview. And, you know, it doesn't matter how many times I've seen that video that you shared. Every time I hear the phrase, you know, it's not the people that are disabled, it's the environment that disables them. It's just a really powerful message, I think, that hits home and is so important for us what we're talking about today. So we've been getting some good questions in the Q&A, so please do keep them coming. But our final speaker I'd like to invite forward is Councillor Ruth Brooks, who's a councillor for the Titanic DEA in East Belfast. Ruth is also a disability champion with Belfast City Council, and I'd like to invite Ruth to provide us with some reflection on these findings today from a local council perspective. Thanks, Ruth.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me on this. I really do appreciate it. And I suppose today is also the International Day of Persons with Disability, so it is really reflective to look at this piece of work that was commissioned. As a way of introduction, I'm Councillor Ruth Brooks. I was elected for the first time last year to represent the Titanic DEA. Absolutely thrilled to be in a position and in an area in which we have the Connswater, Greenway, C.S. Lewis Square and Titanic Quarter. Some amazing transformation over the past number of decades in this area. But prior to being in elected politics, I had developed a very strong passion for working with people with additional needs. This came from a visit to Mitchell House Special Needs School in East Belfast, where I was completely humbled to meet so many children, carers and families who overcome daily challenges just to do the simple things that we really do take for granted. And now elected, I'm in a really unique and wonderful position in that I chair the People and Communities Committee and also the Disability Working Group. And earlier this year, I also became the Belfast City Council Disability Champion. It's a really huge role to take on. I'm very much led by the community, but I've had some wonderful conversations with Jacqueline around this. So I was particularly pleased to see that this piece of work did come forward. The development of the Connswater Community Greenway has been one of the best visions that the city has had to offer, and I note that our colleagues in other quadrants of the city are very, very envious. They're still at maybe the beginning stages of mapping out a greenway, or they are currently coming through the process. So I suppose our Connswater Community Greenway is very much a shining example of what can be achieved through ambitious urban planning and investment in public spaces. I do want to keep my remarks quite short today, but in reflecting on the publication, I just want to look at how we got to where we are now, and then also looking at into the future how we can inspire and expand on accessibility. As Jacqueline has already touched on, the Connswater Community Greenway was envisaged as a £40 million project to connect and regenerate East Belfast. And even from its inception, accessibility was prioritised with features like wheelchair-friendly pathways, smooth surfaces, cycle-friendly routes, and also the innovative flood management solutions that benefit the wider community. I think the recent storm Bert caused so much flooding in areas of East Belfast, such as Dundonald, the natural flooding of Orangefield Park and not neighbouring Clarawood and Sandhill is testament to how much this project has benefited communities. The Greenway's initial design laid the groundwork for inclusivity, but it didn't fully address the diverse and evolving needs of people with disabilities, highlighting the importance of continued adaptation, but also this piece of work that was commissioned to really get to grips with here's where we are and here's where we need to go. There are specific challenges, including the limited toilet facilities and particularly the lack of maybe fully equipped changing places toilets, which can hinder access for individuals with complex needs. One of the people who has asked a question in the question and answer function had mentioned there around people with deafness who maybe look at more visuals, and I completely agree on that. It can be things like the tactile features, braille, or even for maybe people with who are non-verbal or have additional needs, communication boards are so key as well. So it would be great at some stage that we could see that being taken forward. The Connswater Community Greenway is now a vibrant, inclusive space, and it is actively used by the disability groups in the wider community. Really pleased to see the event space, the Wheel and Walk workshop that was facilitated, and also having the Royal National Institute for the Blind People and the Mae Murray Foundation being able to use the Greenway. I was also delighted, you may have seen in the news that Frank McKee was in the news for very positive reasons. 10 years ago, he unfortunately took a stroke and had felt very, very isolated within his home. But he got involved with Brain Injury Matters here based down at C.S. Lewis Square. And this year he raised over £5,000 by cycling on an adapted bicycle from C.S. Lewis Square up to Victoria Park, did a number of laps of Victoria Park and back, and he was absolutely beaming with pride that he was able to do that. that, and that's all because this space is fully adaptable for people who have additional needs. Mobility aids, wheelchairs have allowed individuals with limited mobility to explore, which were previously inaccessible parts of East Belfast. I have very fond memories of my two uncles literally being tearaways on their mobility scooter. They probably thought they were going a lot faster than about 4 miles an hour, but they tore down that Greenway speed, and I have very fond memories of the pair of them. The Wheel and Walk workshop represented a thoughtful and innovative approach to community engagement, especially within the context of accessibility and urban planning. Providing the changing places toilets has provided dignified restroom facilities for individuals with complex needs. This can be a really huge barrier for individuals or families that want to go out into the open space. I know Belfast City Council have been working on their proposals to bring forward an accessible changing places toilet for some time, and I really do hope to have an update in the new year on that. It is really, really fundamentally key to making just any space fully accessible. Aside from that, some of the other ongoing challenges that have already been mentioned include cyclists and pedestrians and the access to the shared space. Also, dog owners who do let their dogs off the lead can be very enthusiastic and maybe don't have the best recall. But again, if you have some additional needs, these can be some of the challenges that you can face. The continuous feedback from users, and included within this report, also highlights the need for maintenance, the reassessment of physical barriers, and the implementation of permanent accessibility solutions. As we grow into our respective roles and encourage more people out into the Greenway, it's taking on board that feedback and hoping that we can adapt to be more inclusive. The Greenway has certainly made significant strides towards inclusion, but we need to keep looking at what additional barriers are and trying to address them. Looking to the future then, the Greenway is certainly a model for accessibility. The Greenway has the potential to become the benchmark for accessibility. It serves as an inspiration for inclusive urban spaces in Belfast and beyond. My colleagues in the northwest of the city are looking at the Forth Meadow Greenway and Cave Hill as potential to become more inclusive. Many of you may know my colleague, High Sheriff Councillor Sammy Douglas, who has been involved with the Greenway from the very beginning. He can often be found out cycling at 6:30 in the morning up and down the Connswater Greenway, tells me everything that's going on. But anytime any other Greenway is discussed when we are in council, he still makes it about the Connswater Greenway, so he certainly is very much a champion. I think some of the other issues that we potentially would have is looking at issues with those who are nonverbal or also have ADHD or autism. Having those little quiet spaces is so key. I know that the play parks are being made more. I know that the play parks. Sorry about this. I know that the play parks are being made more inclusive slowly within Belfast City Council. I have been very much committed to trying to find communication boards and pushing that through Belfast City Council. We've asked for one in Tommy Patten Park. We've asked for one in Tuckmona. It's taken 27 months to get to fruition, and that hasn't happened. But it's understanding that that's a need, not a want. Also, I think that there's a huge role for the Greenway to be involved in educational programs, promoting mutual respect and understanding. The Greenway is just fantastic. It brings so many people out on a good summer's day. You can expect whenever EastSide are putting on some of their fantastic programs, the area is just bustling with people. But it's understanding that accessibility isn't a one-off project, it's an ongoing process. I started speaking this afternoon by mentioning Mitchell House School, and I'll finish with this. There's an ongoing development around the Sydenham Greenway, which will link into Victoria Park and the Connswater Greenway. And when developed, the pupils will be able to use the whole route with their families, so they will be able to access from Tommy Patten Park down into Victoria Park and onto the Connswater Greenway. it's an extension of their playground. One of the teachers brought an adaptable bicycle equipped with a platform at the front, and they carefully reversed a child in a wheelchair onto the platform and secured them with a buckle to secure them in safely. And as the teacher began to pedal the child, who was wheelchair bound, experienced the most exhilarating sensation of the wind on their face for the first time, as if they were the one that were cycling. And the smiles of the children as they were whizzed around the park was something that I will never, ever forget. So when we talk about inclusivity and accessibility, this needs to be considered at the beginning of every project and not the end. But I particularly want to commend Groundswell and the Connswater Greenway for commissioning this piece of work, and particularly focusing on how to make this wonderful space more inclusive. So thank you very much for having me. And if you have anything that you think that we should be doing as a council, in terms of whether it's through people in communities or whether it's through the disability working group, my inbox is always open. I'm very much community led and I value any input I can have. So thank you very much, Niamh.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you for that perspective. Really helpful from local council perspective. And again, it's also very generous of you to welcome people to get in touch with you if they have any follow-up questions or suggestions. So thank you again to all of our speakers. We now just have a couple of minutes for question and answer discussion with all of our speakers. So if you'd like to pop your videos on again, I'm just going to pick up some of the questions that were in the Q&A box. And I think the first one would be for you, Kyleigh. There were two questions that were, I suppose, thinking along the same lines about cross-border thinking with inclusive beaches. So Christine had asked if there were any cross-border initiatives, and Stephen had asked if there were any shared learning across councils in NI or in ROI.
Yes, so the Mae Murray Foundation, we obviously, whenever you set up an organisation, you create your purposes and your articles of association, etc. So we are created to support people in Northern Ireland. So our membership is generally Northern Ireland. However, we accept membership from border counties as well. Members from, anyone from across Ireland and the rest of the world are welcome to use our projects in Northern Ireland. But we won't be creating beaches any further afield effectively than Northern Ireland. However, what we have done, because I was spending an awful lot of time giving people advice, not just across Ireland, UK, but the rest of the world. That is why we have created Adapt My Beach. So it's effectively, I think it's like a 200-page guide on how to create an inclusive beach, includes your risk assessment and everything else that's needed. The approach that we take is very much a partnership approach. So we don't own the beach. The council or the National Trust in Northern Ireland own the beaches, and we partner with them. So we have purchased the equipment. We are responsible for the servicing, the training and so on. But council have responsibilities in there as well. They have to staff the project. They have to create change in places, toilets, parking, and really make sure that the infrastructure is in place. But it's a really good, the partnership approach is the sustainable approach. And having spoken to many people across the rest of the UK and Ireland who are doing bits and pieces, it's very hard to create something sustainable if it's either just council or either just a charity. So the collaborative approach has really worked. So we have lots of good relationships across Ireland, and we are supporting people to create beaches there with our guide.
And thank you. And we can pop the link to the guide as well into the chat and include it in our circulated email afterwards so that people can access that. Jacqueline, I'd like to sort of ask you a similar question. I know you addressed or you answered it a little bit in the Q&A box. But there was a question around learnings and linkages with other sites, such as Cumber or perhaps non-NI spaces. And I suppose I'm wondering, is there much interest from across the region in the Connswater Community Greenway? And I suppose are these learnings that you can share with people who are interested from their own perspective?
Yeah, I think so. this is what I find really interesting from this, because we're not an organisation that specifically or solely works with people living with a disability. So it is, and I think you touched on it there, very, very key, Kyleigh. It's about those collaborations and partnerships. Mae Murray Foundation supported this piece of work that we did as well, because they're working with clients or members with lived experience. So that collaboration is really key. But on the other side of that, because we're not solely working on that, there were a lot of things that we didn't expect to find from this. And that's why it's really important to engage people with lived experience, because they were able to share learnings that I never expected to come up. But a lot of that stuff is something that would probably be a challenge in every urban green space, not solely the Connswater Community Greenway. Things like litter, things like infrastructural barriers, or overgrown shrubbery, or shared use of space. All of those, I think you can imagine, in any green space you go to, those similar challenges will pop up. So I do think there's a lot of learning in this that can be shared in other green spaces. Of course, every green space has its own individual or unique nuances. So you definitely can't take a one shoe fits all approach or one size fits all approach, but it can definitely form the basis of engagement. And if we're lobbying for things, I think those at the very bare minimum are things we could lobby for going forward.
Thank you, Jacqueline. And there was another question, and it's just coming back to something that you picked up at the start there, that it's interesting that between the two organisations speaking today, we have one that is specifically looking at accessibility and inclusion, and then yourselves who are not specifically looking at accessibility and inclusion. And we had, within the organisation, and we had a question from Kate on tackling the issue of understanding what inclusivity is. And I think this would be a question to hear, I think, all of you speak on. It would be quite nice around how do we tackle maybe misunderstanding what inclusivity is. There are different expectations and aspirations for making spaces accessible. And I suppose I'd like to open that up to everyone. Maybe Ruth, starting with you.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's a really great question to ask. For me, when I'm looking at inclusivity, any of events that council put on, I think it's very easy to see disability as what you fill in when you're doing your Section 75 at the end of your planning process. But inclusivity is something that needs to be from the beginning, where you build in, considering that there are such a wide number of disabilities or illnesses that people can potentially not feel comfortable stepping outside of their house to go to. It's how you cover that base. So we were looking at things like the changing places toilets that really opened up that workshop to make it fully inclusive for somebody. It is, I know I've had a discussion, and Jacqueline will be aware of this, is something even so simple as videoing the venue, so that somebody who really struggles to understand what am I going into, where's my safe place, again, if they have additional needs in terms of needing toileting, it can be very difficult sometimes to find out where they are. So you break down, sometimes barriers to us can be, we go from A to B, but actually there's so much between that A to B, somewhere easy for everybody to go and access. So even when this piece was about how do we make the Greenway more inclusive, a layman probably would look at that and think, well, it's a big space, like it's wonderful, it's flat and it's all brand new. But actually, when you start to put in all of the different things, signposting, braille, communication boards, toileting, all of those things that we just take for granted, that's where you need to start from, so that you cover all of those bases, so that everybody feels that they have equality when it comes to accessing the Greenway. Hopefully that makes sense for you.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that idea of, it has to be thought of the beginning, from the beginning, is really true. Kyleigh, I suppose as an organisation, the same question, do you come up against people maybe misunderstanding what you're talking about when you say inclusivity or accessibility?
Yeah. Inclusion is a topical word. Everybody likes to think that they're inclusive from whatever angle they're coming from. We like to think that our version of inclusion is actually inclusion. Because we don't just look at ability, we're not just looking at disability. All of our guides are looking at everyone. So we're thinking of all groups who could be excluded. Now, we don't necessarily have the expertise in all of those areas, but what we do is reach out to other communities. So we're making sure that we're accessing, we're talking about different genders, religions, abilities, and faiths and things. So it's really important that we're not using the word just to cover our own topic. Access to us is very much about the barriers that are in place, the physical barriers. For a beach, that's the ramp that gets you down on. It's your parking. It's your lack of dignified toileting. But also not just physical barriers, you also have access to information. So if your website isn't suitably telling people how to actually get to your location and where those toilets are, then your website isn't accessible. So it's a very hot topic that we have been in our play guide. Specifically, we have created a guide to creating inclusive playgrounds. Working with Play Board and Play Safety Forum, there was a long battle about inclusivity versus accessibility there, and really all community venues should be accessible. All parks should be accessible. But inclusion is that extra layer where we can all be included and take part. So I hope that makes sense.
Definitely, and it comes back to the idea maybe of, if we design our places for the most vulnerable, then everybody should be able to access them, right? Jacqueline, I'm going to bounce the question to you, but also add another question just to make your life a bit more difficult, about, I suppose, how you thinking about this and coming up against, I suppose, inclusion and accessibility that's maybe slightly newer for you as an organisation. How does this change maybe how you'll plan events in the future, or how maybe new spaces along the Greenway might be designed, or anything that you might think might be altered by this piece of work?
Yeah, and I think what you said there, Kyleigh, is really important, because inclusion can be so many different things. And when we started this report, we went so wide on it as well. We thought, well, inclusion could include people feeling safe, and that could be gender-based, that could be cultural or economic. There are so many reasons that some people might not feel that they're welcome in a space that is not just physical barriers. So this is such a huge topic, and it is important to kind of figure out which element of that you're focusing on each piece of work, and that is key. In terms of things that we feel like we can affect, or have at least tried to, this report will certainly change. Firstly, how we're lobbying for further improvements on the Greenway. As I mentioned before, it's highlighted stuff that I never thought of before, and we'll now include that in all of the work that we do going forward, and talking about how we can improve the Greenway. But it's also made us look at ourselves a little bit and what we do. We program events all year round, and we like to think we're inclusive and we like to think we reduce barriers, but actually, are we doing everything that we could do? An example of this is, once this report was launched in the summer, we decided to look at one of our biggest events in the year, a family fun day in the park, or on the Greenway, in fact, through the lens of access and inclusion. And, it was about looking at things like letting people know where the toilets are along the route in advance, letting people know where proper and appropriate parking would be if they wanted to come along to the event. It was about booking in an access to Lough, a change in places space in the Greenway. It was about having appropriate signage that was not just visually appropriate, but placed in the right place where people could see that. And even as simple as, we put our activities on a grassy area, could we make sure they're closer to the path so that somebody in a wheelchair or mobility scooter can actually access those activities? So it was lots of things that we tried to factor in. And what I learned was that you really do need to be doing that for all of your events if you really want to try and make everything a bit more welcoming. But that was a big learning curve for us, and it is only the start of the journey. So it'll be interesting to see, or exciting to see, how we move forward with that.
Definitely just the start. Thank you, Jacqueline, and thank you to our speakers, and thank you for answering that question. I think it's a really important one around how we understand what inclusion is and how we communicate what inclusion is as well. So in the interest of time, I know there's a few other things we'd love to pick up on, but we don't want to keep people over their lunch. So thank you all for taking the time to join us this afternoon. Thank you so much to our speakers, Jacqueline O'Hagan, Kyleigh, Lough and Ruth Brooks, for your presentations and for the discussion. You can access both of those reports. They're in the chat, but they're also on the Groundswell website. And this webinar has been recorded, so you'll be able to access it afterwards. We'll be circulating a link to the recording in an email to all of the participants and putting it up on our website afterwards. But for now, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for talking about this really important topic, and we'll hopefully see you again soon. Thanks, everyone.